Hi, welcome to Digging for Truth, presented by Associates for Biblical Research. I'm your host, Henry Smith. On Digging for Truth, we explore the reliability and authenticity of the gospel as it's found in the 66 books of the Bible. Today, Dr. Dewayne Bryant of Faulkner University joins us to interact with the claim that Christianity is merely a mystery cult, which has borrowed certain doctrines and ideas from pagan religions in the ancient Near East. I'm sure you'll be intrigued by what Dewayne has to say about all of this, and we'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Bryant. Welcome to Digging for Truth for the first time. Great to have you on, man.
Hey, man, it's wonderful to get to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, Dewayne. Well, we were talking before the show that we've had correspondence with each other from time to time, probably over a period of a decade or so, I would say, off and on. And so I feel like I know you, even though this is the first time we've talked. So it's just really great to have you on. Before we jump into this really interesting subject about, is Christianity a quote mystery cult? I'd like you to tell the audience just a little bit about yourself, about what you do and your background, and maybe a little bit about why you're interested in this subject.
Okay, so I have a very long-standing interest in the Greco-Roman world, even though really my area of research is focused in the Old Testament and Hebrew Bible. So currently I serve as an assistant professor of Bible at Faulkner University. I'm here in Montgomery, Alabama. And while I, again, do focus primarily in Old Testament, my undergraduate was in history and focused or concentrated in Greco-Roman history. And that's always been a love of mine. And that is particularly where this topic of mystery cults and mystery religions really is sort of centered.
All right, cool. So I guess the first question we should ask, the most basic one, is what actually is a mystery cult, and then how is it distinguished from what we call formal cults of the Greco-Roman world? And maybe explain about cult. Usually people think in the modern day of something like Jim Jones and Guyana or something like that. So maybe give a little explanation of that in an ancient context.
Okay, so a mystery cult, official or formal cult, they are different, even though they do have some of the same figures and are generally based in the same mythological traditions. Now, it is important to define the word cult. Basically, what we mean when we are talking about ancient religions and talking about a cult or a cultus, it just means a system of religious expression where you're venerating the gods, expressing devotion to the gods, and that typically involves something physical. So you've got temples and altars and sacrifices. You may have things like little statues, what are called votives or votive offerings. In some places, there's even this really bizarre thing called anatomical votives, which are if you've ever seen a little plaque or a little statue of a body part, sometimes these were put in temples to commemorate the healing of a person, and the body part is the part of them that got healed. There's all kinds of little strange things, but that physical aspect of it is a big part of the cult. Now, as far as mystery religions versus formal or official or state religions, civic religions, we're talking about something that, with the mystery cults, is supposed to provide a deeper connection to the deity on the part of the individual worshiper, as it was conceived in the pagan mind. So with formal cults, you would go to temple, you would make your sacrifices and offerings, you have your religious expressions that you would do. But for mystery religions, this is different. There's a more personal connection with the deity that you didn't get with the traditional expressions of this particular religious faith.
It's interesting. So is the mystery part that it's not sanctioned by the state, or is there another dimension of like secret knowledge that's connected to the quote mystery? Maybe flesh that out a little bit for us.
Sure. So the mystery cults, the reason why we call them mystery cults is because we don't really know a lot about them. We know what they were. We know what gods they were built around. We know some of what they did and different characteristics of people who were initiated into these cults. But as far as written texts, very often we don't have very much by way of that. So maybe the best or worst example, depending on how you look at it, is Mithras. So we have virtually nothing about this god. All we have are statues, a few inscriptions, artwork, no written texts. So part of what makes it so mysterious is we don't really know a lot about what they believed always. Now, this was something that was decidedly kept a secret and just shared with initiates. There were times when people would potentially reveal some of the secrets of the mystery cults, and they got into big trouble. So with the Eleusinian mysteries, which were observed in Athens or around Athens, it was a crime to reveal the secrets of that particular mystery religion.
So a few things come to mind with that. So comment on these. I guess the first thing is, since it wasn't a big state-sanctioned religion in the Roman Empire or the Greek Empire, it makes sense that we don't have much written text because it was done sort of organically and individually. So if I'm thinking right, comment on that. And then I guess this spread orally primarily. So did they have sacred texts that they used? Talk about some of that a little bit.
Okay, so as far as sacred texts, again, not much by way of that. Some of it is just inference. Art historians would, for instance, to use the example of Mithras, there's a lot about the statuary we just don't get. Is it statues? Do they express some kind of cosmological beliefs? What about pictures of stars in the artwork? What does all that mean? We don't quite know. There's a lot of educated guesses, but not a lot of written texts. And as far as being a religion that was sanctioned by the state, they were permitted. There was no problem with being part of a mystery cult. There were emperors who were initiated into some of the mysteries. But as far as the average person probably had some kind of idea about what these people believed. But if you were an initiate and were to reveal some of the deeper mysteries, that was a problem. So they didn't do it in texts. And things were passed along orally, it seems, but to distribute that to the wider population, that was an issue. There were a couple of examples. For instance, one fellow, Aeschylus, who was a Greek playwright, who was put on trial for potentially including some of the material from the mysteries of Eleusis in some of his work. And then there was another fellow in Athens who actually had a bounty put out on him. He was, dead or alive. Bring him in for being very disrespectful to the religions, but also for divulging some of the secrets of the mysteries. So
that's fascinating.
They didn't put things down in writing, it seems.
Yeah.
Things were spread orally, but yeah, you weren't supposed to share it.
Okay, I'd like to build on that. We're going to take a break real quick, and then we'll come back on that. Let's build on that some more, Dewayne. Thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We'll be right back.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures for students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm Henry Smith. I'm here with Dr. Dewayne Bryant. We're talking about, is Christianity a mystery cult? Okay, so Dewayne, you were explaining in the last segment a bit about mystery cults as sort of the enigma of we don't know much about them because they were kept a mystery and we don't have written text, very little, but we do know something about it. But it occurred to me that the claim that this somehow is the Christian worldview came out of this in some way or is dependent on it. Everything you explained in the last segment seems to be the opposite of that. Let's explore that a little bit. The secrecy, no written text. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Sure. So if you go to YouTube, you're going to find, and you search mystery religions, you're going to find video after video after video showing the similarities, supposedly, between mystery cults and Christianity. The truth of the matter is, in many ways, they could hardly be more different. So we mentioned the aspect of very few written texts. What is so striking about the New Testament? It is the best attested collection of documents from antiquity. Thousands upon thousands of manuscripts, tens of thousands more in translation, and that's before you even hit medieval times,
yes.
Right? And so, so you have all of this proliferation of texts that is decidedly opposite of what the mystery cults tried to do. You have things like initiation was only during certain days or certain times of the year. One of the things about the New Testament is there's no time limit. In fact, whenever you deal with evangelism, whenever you deal with conversion in the New Testament, there does appear to be some sense of urgency when it comes to that. It's not, you get initiated whenever you want. We got certain times of the year. You do it during this festival, or here's only a certain limited number of days. It's no, we want you to confess Christ as quickly and as genuinely as possible. Make sure that that opportunity is always available. And initiates were to keep the teachings of their mystery religion secret. You go to the very end of Matthew's gospel, and the Great Commission is go out into all the world and make disciples of all nations, right? So there is a sense of scatter this as far abroad as possible. And then you have things like for initiates, they were required to pay a fee, make some kind of contribution. And for Christianity, it's, the gospel is for all. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or you're poor. In fact, in James chapter 2, there is a section where he says, no, you don't discriminate between rich and poor.
Yes.
Generally speaking, for a lot of mystery religions, it was generally those who were better off. And you could be initiated into multiple religions. You didn't have to just stick with one. Christianity is very particular about being the way, the truth, and the light when it comes to Jesus. Yeah,
a little bit like modern day Scientology, if you want to make that connection. Like, there's a lot of rich people in Scientology. It's a shakedown scheme, right? And follow the money. I hate to be so simplistic about it, but really, that nothing has changed as far as that goes. Yeah, and Christianity is open to everyone, rich and poor, male and female, anyone it's open to. So just the general I think what you've sketched out is the general character of Christianity. We're not even talking about particular doctrines at this point. Just the way that Christianity is, they were called the people of the book, right? Mm-hmm. We have all of these manuscripts, Old and New Testament. I think you make some great points there, Dewayne. So these mystery cults, I guess the question also would be the question of what we would call chronology, the timing of them. When they occurred, when the elements of them were in comparison to the gospel, maybe when did the first ones arise, or what are the most familiar ones, and when did they arise? Comment on that if you would, please.
Okay, so for the oldest mystery religion seems to be the Eleusinian mysteries. Seems to have been originally celebrated at the city of Eleusis, which is near Athens. Later on, Athens kind of gets roped into it, and the celebration is shared between those two cities. It may have appeared as early as 1000 BC, and it's based on the myth of the abduction of Persephone by Hades. So there is a series of influences from that particular mythological tradition on this mystery cult. That's what it's based on. And during their, rituals, they would reenact that abduction. And of course, for viewers are probably familiar with, Persephone's out one day. Hades takes a shine to her, as male gods often did with goddesses and women, and abducts her and takes her to the underworld. So that's what the oldest and probably best established mystery cult is based on that myth. The Dionysian mysteries is involving the god Dionysus. There was some involving the god or the mythological figure of Orpheus, and then toward the first century is Mithraism, and so the Mithraic mysteries, maybe as early as first century BC.
Okay.
So some of these things do predate Christianity, some post-date.
Okay, so let's focus on that Mithraism. Not that other stuff isn't relevant to the broader discussion, but we got about a minute in this segment. Maybe tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe give us a taste of what people try to say, how that somehow influenced the gospel, and then we'll pick up on it in the next segment.
Okay, so just a few quick bullet points. Savior God, dying and rising God, born of a virgin, born on December 25th. Those are some of the cardinal points of people who promote this very popular misunderstanding of Mithras and the Mithraic mysteries. Basically, all of this is false, and so we can explore that a little bit more.
Yes,
but it's a lot of the same problems with other mystery cults. But Mithra is more, relevant because it is the one that is sort of the banner example of Christianity must have borrowed from this particular cult.
Okay, we're going to explore that a little bit more. One more point I could probably add to it too is that when you read the New Testament, it's dripping with the Old. There's no indication of any connection to any kind of mystery cult at all. It's all based on what happened in the Old Testament is building towards the new and the coming of Jesus. But we're going to explore this a little bit more in our next segment. And friends, thank you for being with us today on Digging for Truth. We'll be right back.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm Henry Smith. I'm your host. I'm here with Dr. Dewayne Bryant, and we're exploring the question, is Christianity just a mystery cult? Okay, Dewayne, we left off in our last segment talking about Mithras. Okay, so I want to let you explain a little bit more about that, make the connections, and do your apologetic work on the arguments that are out there in misinformation world.
Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, Mithras. This is particularly exciting around Christmas time. So we just had the peak. At Christmas time, basically every year this comes out. But you have people who are generally drawing on things, popular level sources that are not scholarly in nature, that will promote ideas like, Mithras was a dying and rising savior god. Well, again, with Mithras in particular, there is no text anywhere that mentions him dying. There's no text anywhere mentioning him being resurrected or dying for anyone's sins. This is pure fabrication. You'll have things like, texts say that he was born on December 20th. No text says this. There's no December 25th birth date for Mithras. You've got examples of people who will talk about how he was born of a virgin, like all these other savior gods. And when you look at depictions of the moment that Mithras emerges, he comes out of a rock, fully equipped with a Phrygian hat and a sword and a torch. And so, I guess if you want to call that a virgin birth, you have to be very flexible in how you describe that. But, that is nothing like what we see in the New Testament, which builds on the Old Testament. One of the things I think folks who have this illusion that the mystery cults contributed to Christianity is they miss the fact that New Testament writers consistently point back to the Old Testament, not to pagan religion. About a third of the New Testament consists of quotations of or allusions to the Old Testament. And of course, you have Jesus, even in the gospel, saying, you guys should know who I am. The law and the prophets, they talked about me. They didn't have to go to some pagan religion. All they had to do was go to the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, that's an excellent survey, Dewayne. It's really, really helpful. I think one of the lessons too for our audience, we live in an age, it's quite an enigma. On the one hand, we have access to more information than any people in the history of the world. And at the same time, we have access to more misinformation than any people in the history of the world. And this is a problem, I think, for laymen in the church. It must feel overwhelming, especially at Christmas time. Maybe in your experience, you have pastoral background, you're an apologist, you love the Bible. Maybe speak into that a little bit, words of encouragement, words of wisdom for someone watching who might be just, feeling like they're under a tsunami of this kind of stuff. Maybe speak into that if you would.
Okay, so for someone who maybe doesn't have much of a background in this, doesn't really know much about it, what I will say is this. You have to keep something in mind, and that is, for those who make these kinds of connections, they're obviously not Christians, right? And many of them are avowed critics of Christianity. It is a basic human tendency to fail to do proper research and to fail to adequately represent the beliefs of someone when you disagree profoundly with them. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that we have this temptation to immediately grant critics some leeway or some credence if their argument sounds plausible, or wow, I've never heard this before. This is unusual. This connection seems like it works, but it goes against my faith. Having a skeptical approach to this, because again, for many critics, they do not represent the Christian faith properly, and that makes them much more willing to see connections that aren't there. In fact, that's actually been a problem for scholarship. Early scholarship in dealing with the mystery cults scholars would often adopt Christian language and then apply it to different beliefs or customs in the mystery religions. And all of a sudden, here are these connections between the mystery religions and Christianity that didn't actually exist. They only existed because they were maybe unintentionally, maybe sometimes intentionally, fabricated through the misuse of language, misappropriation of language. So that is where a lot of critics are going to be coming from when they use research for this kind of thing. In fact, there's one document that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote when he was a student in the 1950s, comparing Christianity favorably to the mystery cults. And some people will actually look at that and, oh no, that's work that's 70 years old that is not reflective of current scholarship. So go with stuff that's current.
Yes. And laud Dr. King for what he did that was right, but we can criticize, just like any other human being, anything that's illegitimate, and this sounds like it falls in that category. All right, well, Dewayne, believe it or not, we got about a minute left, so I'm gonna give you a minute to wrap up the show. You can do it any way you want, and appreciate this. It's been an education for me as the host of the TV show, so have at it.
Well, what I'll say is, for viewers, be careful. You're going to get all kinds of statements made connecting Christianity with mystery religions, saying that Christianity borrowed from, plagiarized from pre-existing beliefs. Be very careful about that, because that is not what scholars believe. Okay, so genuine scholars who investigate this area academically and professionally generally do not make those connections. You will get that in the wild, wild west of YouTube and TikTok. You will rarely, if ever, find it in the ivory towers of academia.
Yeah, that's excellent, Dewayne. Well, thank you for being on the show. Appreciate your sharing your knowledge about this. Very helpful. I hope our audience is edified. Appreciate what you do, and we're going to have you on for another program, so folks stay tuned for that. Thanks, Dewayne.
Thank you.
Well, friends, thank you again for joining us for Digging for Truth. Hope this has been educational for you. You should know with certainty to do what the Apostle Paul actually instructs us to do. Test everything, hold on to the good, and explore these truth claims. When you come across them, pause, pray, look for information. come to our ministry. We'll help you out. We appreciate your support and your watching Digging for Truth. We hope you have a fantastic day.